A simple traffic stop, or was it a calculated ambush? When a group of corrupt cops decide to intimidate a black man driving through their turf, they have no idea they've just picked the wrong target. He's not just another passerby, they've just crossed paths with a man who holds the power to dismantle everything they've built. What follows is a relentless showdown of manipulation, deception, and the ultimate pursuit of justice. And here's the kicker: you won't believe how it all ends until you're right there in the middle of the storm. Are you ready for the truth they tried to bury? Drop a comment below with where you're tuning in from and what time you're watching. We're excited to have you on this wild journey. The night had settled thick over the affluent suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia, draping the world in a cloak of cool darkness. Rain whispered against the rooftops, its steady drizzle tracing silver lines down the glossy sides of black wrought iron gates and pristine white columns. The streetlights cast amber reflections on the wet pavement, their glow fractured by the occasional puddle. Harrison Blackwell, a man of distinction and poise at 68, drove slowly through the winding streets in his sleek Lincoln Continental. The car purred smoothly beneath his hands as he navigated the narrow roads bordered by perfectly trimmed hedges and opulent estates. The evening had been a welcome reprieve, an annual dinner with old colleagues who had once shared his passion for justice and reform. Laughter, wine, and reminiscence had flowed freely. But now, as he guided the car through the rain-soaked neighborhood, Harrison found his mind wandering to the work awaiting him back home. The briefcase resting on the passenger seat contained documents he had spent months assembling: testimonies, financial records, encrypted emails, all evidence of a corruption network that had burrowed itself deep within the Atlanta Police Department. After his retirement from the federal bench, Harrison had dedicated himself to rooting out corruption wherever it festered. He was no longer constrained by bureaucratic red tape or political alliances, and that made him dangerous to those who thrived on impunity. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Red and blue lights flared to life behind him, a flashing storm of authority and intimidation. Harrison's chest tightened. This wasn't the first time he'd been pulled over without cause, and it likely wouldn't be the last. He sighed, guiding his car to the curb. The tires crunched softly against the damp asphalt. His movements were practiced: calm engine off, window rolled down, hands placed firmly on the steering wheel. He had been through this dance too many times to make a mistake now. The patrol car parked aggressively behind him, headlights glaring through the rain like judgmental eyes. Harrison remained still, his gaze locked on the side mirror as he watched the officer emerge. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, his uniform stretched tightly over a muscular frame. The arrogance in his stride was evident, his boots slapping the wet ground with forceful certainty. License and registration. The officer barked as soon as he reached Harrison's window. His voice was sharp, disdainful. A man used to barking orders and having them obeyed without question. "Good evening, officer," Harrison replied, his tone smooth and polite. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" "You were driving too slow," the cop snapped. His name tag read Sloan, and the scowl on his face was as heavy as the rain. "What are you trying to hide?" Harrison kept his gaze steady. He had encountered this type before, power-hungry. Bullies in uniform who thrived on intimidation and wielded authority like a weapon. "It's raining," Harrison explained. "The roads are slick. I was simply driving cautiously." Sloan smirked, his eyes narrowing. "Sure. Or maybe you're trying to stall me, trying to hide something." "I assure you, officer, I'm not hiding anything. If you'd like to see my license and registration, I'll be happy to provide them." The officer stared at Harrison for a long moment, suspicion etched into every wrinkle of his face. Finally, he snapped his fingers impatiently. "Hand them over." Harrison moved carefully, his every action deliberate and slow. He opened the glove compartment, retrieved his license and registration, and extended them to Sloan. The officer snatched them from his hand with unnecessary force. But instead of inspecting the documents, Sloan tossed them onto the passenger seat. His eyes were already roving over the interior of the car, seeking out anything he could twist into justification for escalation. "Step out of the vehicle," Sloan ordered, his voice flat and uncompromising. Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Officer, may I ask why step out of the vehicle?" Sloan's hand dropped to the baton at his hip, fingers flexing with eager authority. The rain fell harder now, splattering against Harrison's windshield. He released a slow breath, his fingers flexing once before he opened the door and stepped out. The cool air greeted him with a stinging bite, mingling with the dampness already clinging to his tailored suit. Sloan stepped back, his hand still resting on the baton, as if he expected trouble. "Turn around." Hands on the hood. Harrison's jaw tightened. This was more than a simple traffic stop. It was intimidation. But he complied, his palms pressing against the cool metal of his own car. "Is there a reason you're being so aggressive, officer?" Harrison asked over his shoulder. "Don't get smart with me." Sloan's voice carried the arrogance of a man who rarely faced consequences for his actions. "What are you doing out here at this hour? This is a nice neighborhood. Doesn't seem like the kind of place you'd be comfortable in." "I live here," Harrison replied evenly. "Just a few streets over." "Sure you do," Sloan sneered. He stepped forward, crowding into Harrison's personal space. "Open the trunk." Harrison straightened, turning to face the officer. "With all due respect, Officer Sloan, you haven't provided a legitimate reason for stopping me, much less searching my vehicle. Respect?" Sloan's eyes glinted with something dark, almost predatory. "You think you deserve respect? This is my jurisdiction, and I don't need a reason." Harrison's patience was thinning, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Legally, you do." Sloan chuckled, a low, ugly sound. "Legally? You really want to start quoting the law to me?" He reached for his radio, his gaze never leaving Harrison's. "I can call this in. Have you dragged downtown for obstruction? How's that sound?" The threat was hollow, Harrison knew, but it was also reckless. Abuse of authority with no pretense of justification. "Go ahead," Harrison replied. "Call it in. I'm sure your superiors would be interested in why you felt the need to escalate a routine. Stop into something more." Sloan's smirk faltered for a moment before his scowl returned, deeper and more pronounced. Without another word, he jerked his thumb toward the back of the car. "Pop the trunk. Now." Harrison stared back at him, his expression resolute. He knew this wouldn't end well, but he also knew he wouldn't be the one to break. Harrison's fingers trembled only slightly as he reached for the trunk release. The frigid drizzle had soaked through his jacket, clinging to his skin with an icy persistence. As his thumb pressed down on the button, a dull click echoed from the rear of the vehicle. The trunk swung open with mechanical precision, its contents partially concealed beneath a leather cover. Sloan wasted no time. He strode to the back of the car, his boots splashing against shallow puddles with the authority of a man used to having his demands met. His flashlight snapped on, the harsh white beam slicing through the darkness. Harrison turned to face the officer, his arms folded tightly across his chest. The rain continued to pelt down, its rhythm a relentless backdrop to the increasingly tense standoff. Sloan's demeanor had shifted, his aggression sharpening into something more calculated. He was on a mission now, hunting for justification to escalate this encounter. "What exactly are you looking for, officer?" Harrison asked, his voice steady despite the tension rippling through his muscles. "Drugs, weapons, stolen property." Sloan rattled off the words, as though they were a rehearsed litany. "Maybe something else you don't want me to find." Harrison's lips tightened. "You have no probable cause to be searching my vehicle. This is harassment, plain and simple. You think you can lecture me on what I can and can't do?" Sloan shot back, his flashlight sweeping over the contents of the trunk. "People like you always think you know better. Think you're above the law." Harrison's eyes narrowed. He recognized the coded language, the subtle degradation laced into Sloan's words. This wasn't about the law. It was about power, control, and the officer's desperate need to assert dominance over someone he perceived as a threat. The beam of light paused over a black leather briefcase. its surface gleaming under the rain-slicked glow. Sloane's lips curled into a sneer as he reached for the handle. "That's personal property!" Harrison snapped. "You have no right to open it." "I've got every right," Sloane growled. "You think you're untouchable? Not tonight, you're not." He tugged the briefcase out of the trunk, its weight betraying the number of documents packed within. Harrison felt his pulse quicken, a surge of panic swelling beneath his calm exterior. The files inside were sensitive, highly sensitive. And if Sloane was about to open them, the implications could be catastrophic. "Put that down," Harrison said, his voice clipped and cold. "Whatever you think you're doing, I guarantee you're making a mistake." Sloane laughed, a harsh bark of sound devoid of humor. "You don't get to tell me what to do. I'm the one in control here." "Not for long," Harrison murmured, his gaze locked on the briefcase as Sloane set it atop the slick surface of the trunk. The officer's fingers fumbled with the clasps, his impatience making him clumsy. Rainwater trickled down his wrists, mingling with the mud and grime smudged across his knuckles. Harrison clenched his fists, his jaw tightening as Sloane finally succeeded in popping the briefcase open. Papers spilled forth, some fluttering to the wet ground like dying leaves. The officer cursed under his breath, snatching the documents back up with rough, careless hands. His flashlight scanned the pages, his expression darkening with each line he managed to decipher. "What the hell is all this?" Sloane demanded, his voice thick with suspicion. "Evidence," Harrison replied, his voice steady but laced with barely restrained fury. "Evidence of corruption. Police corruption, including members of your own precinct." Sloane's head snapped up, his gaze sharp and venomous. "You're bluffing, am I?" Harrison's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of truth. "I've spent months compiling those files. Testimonies, financial records, communications between dirty cops and their benefactors. It's all there, laid out in black and white." The officer's breathing quickened, his chest rising and falling beneath the drenched fabric of his uniform. His flashlight shook slightly, the beam quivering as if echoing his own inner turmoil. "You expect me to believe you just happened to be driving around with this garbage?" Sloane spat, his voice cracking under the weight of his disbelief. "I was on my way to deliver it to the Department of Justice," Harrison explained, his tone measured and controlled. "But I suppose you've saved me the trouble of proving there's something rotten within your department." Sloane's eyes narrowed to slits. "You're full of shit. Check the documents for yourself," Harrison said coolly. "Or better yet, don't. Keep your fingerprints on them. Continue to mishandle evidence in plain view of your dash camera. Every move you make right now is being recorded." The statement hit its mark. Sloane's eyes darted to the patrol car, his expression momentarily betraying genuine fear. But it was fleeting, replaced quickly by a sneer of defiance. "You think I'm scared of you?" he snapped, stuffing the papers back into the briefcase with a carelessness that bordered on desperation. "You think I give a damn about your threats?" "They're not threats, officer," Harrison replied, his tone steady. "They're promises, and I always keep my promises." Sloane slammed the briefcase shut with unnecessary force, his shoulders heaving with frustrated rage. The rain continued to pour, its icy fingers digging into the fabric of Harrison's suit. He felt the chill seep into his bones, but refused to show any sign of discomfort. "What's your name?" Sloane demanded, as if he hadn't already read it from the documents he'd rifled through. "You know my name?" Harrison replied evenly, "but I'm not sure you fully understand who I am." The officer's expression twisted into something ugly, a blend of fear and defiance. Whatever bravado he had possessed was now mingled with doubt. "You're going to regret this," Sloane hissed, his voice little more than a whisper. "No," Harrison replied, his eyes gleaming with conviction. "You are." The rain fell harder, drowning out the silence that stretched between them. And Harrison knew, even then, that this confrontation was far from over. Harrison watched as Sloane's knuckles whitened around the handle of the briefcase. The officer's breath had quickened, the wet fabric of his uniform clinging to his chest and shoulders. The tension between them had become a tangible thing, thickening the air until every breath Harrison took felt weighted down by it. Sloane's flashlight trembled slightly as he aimed it back at Harrison's face. The rain was relentless now, falling in icy sheets that stung against their skin and soaked their clothes through. Harrison remained steady, his gaze never wavering from the officer who had so recklessly violated his privacy. "You think you've got me cornered?" Sloane growled, his voice shaking but filled with a dangerous edge. "You think you can come into my neighborhood, drive around like you own the place, and start waving around a bunch of bullshit papers? I don't need to corner you, Officer Sloane." "You've already done that to yourself," Harrison replied, his voice calm and unflinching. "And as for those papers, they're far from bullshit. They're your reality. A reality you've been trying to avoid." Sloane's jaw tightened. He looked down at the briefcase, as if it were a venomous thing that might spring open of its own accord and attack him. But the real poison was already inside his mind, creeping through his veins as he processed the implications of what he'd just seen. The officer's hands were shaking now, not from the cold, but from the sickening realization that he had just exposed himself to something far more dangerous than a routine traffic stop gone wrong. Harrison could see it all playing out behind Sloane's eyes. The calculation, the desperation, the knowledge that the man standing before him had the power to bring his entire world crashing down. And it was clear that Sloane would do anything to prevent that from happening. "You think you're so damn smart," Sloane sneered, his voice cracking under the weight of his own arrogance. "But you don't know who you're dealing with." "Oh, I think I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Harrison replied, his gaze unflinching. "A man who abuses his authority because he's afraid of what will happen if he ever has to face true accountability." "Accountability?" Sloane barked out a laugh, but it was hollow, forced. "You don't know the first thing about what it's like out here, what it takes to keep people like you in line." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "People like me? You know damn well what I mean," Sloane spat, his face twisted with resentment. "You think your fancy words and your suits make you better than everyone else, make you untouchable, but out here, none of that means shit. What matters to you then?" Harrison asked, his voice soft but sharp. "Intimidation? Fear? Is that how you justify treating people like criminals before you even know their names?" Sloane's eyes flickered, a shadow of doubt flashing across his face before he buried it beneath another layer of bravado. "I do what needs to be done to keep the streets safe." "Safe for whom?" Harrison pressed. "People like you? People who've spent their lives believing their power makes them immune to consequences? You want to talk about consequences?" Sloane snapped. "I've seen people like you twist the system to your advantage, pretending you're some kind of hero while the rest of us do the real work. The dirty work. The work that keeps this city from tearing itself apart. What you're describing isn't work, officer. It's corruption." Harrison's voice was cold, his patience worn thin. "And the documents in that briefcase are proof of just how deep that corruption runs." For a moment, Sloane said nothing. The rain continued to pour, drenching them both, until the chill had seeped deep into their bones. But the true coldness between them had nothing to do with the weather. "What's your angle?" Sloane finally asked, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What do you get out of this?" Harrison shook his head. "I'm not looking for money or power, if that's what you're implying. What I want is justice, real justice, and I won't stop until it's delivered." Sloane's face twisted with contempt. "You think you can just waltz into my life and tear everything apart? You don't know who you're messing with?" "I know exactly who I'm messing with," Harrison replied, his voice cutting through the rain like a knife. "A man who's spent too long hiding behind a badge instead of honoring what it's supposed to stand for." Sloane's nostrils flared, his breathing ragged as his fists clenched at his sides. "You're making a big mistake. The only mistake here is yours," Harrison countered. "You chose to abuse your power. You chose to harass me. And now, you're facing the consequences of those choices." Sloane's face was pale now, his eyes darting between Harrison and the briefcase, as if searching for some way to turn the situation to his advantage. But there was none. The evidence was damning, and the longer he stood there, the deeper his own grave became. "Give me the briefcase," Harrison demanded, his voice low and commanding, "before you do something that will ruin your life even more than it already has." But instead of complying, Sloan stepped back, clutching the briefcase like a lifeline. His eyes were wild, his composure shattered. "You're not taking this from me. Not now. Not ever." The desperation in his voice was palpable. He was no longer a man in control of the situation. He was a man drowning, grasping for anything that might keep him afloat. "Officer Sloan," Harrison said, his voice firm but edged with something almost like pity. "Whatever you do next will define the rest of your life. Choose wisely." But Sloan wasn't listening. His mind was spinning, his thoughts tangled with panic and rage. Without another word, he turned and stalked back to his patrol car, the briefcase clutched against his chest like a stolen prize. Harrison watched him go, his expression grim. Whatever happened next, he knew the battle was far from over. And for the first time that night, a chill crept down his spine that had nothing to do with the rain. Sloan's retreat to the patrol car was not one of triumph. It was a frantic, stumbling dash across the slick pavement, his boots slipping slightly as he yanked open the door and threw himself inside. The briefcase hit the passenger seat with a dull thud, its contents spilling partially from the hastily fastened clasps. Papers poked out like sharp white knives, daring him to confront the reality of what he'd uncovered. The rain continued to beat down, heavy droplets clattering against the roof of the patrol car in a relentless assault. Sloan's breathing was shallow, his fingers twitching nervously as he fumbled to key the radio. His thumb hovered over the button, indecision clenching his muscles. He should call it in. File a report. Claim Harrison had been resisting, hiding evidence, anything to justify the invasive search. But his gut churned with the certainty that this was not something he could easily explain away. Not when the man he'd just unlawfully harassed had connections, power, intelligence. Sloan wiped a trembling hand across his damp forehead. The glare of the dashboard lights made his face appear pale and drawn in the mirror. He looked sick. Maybe he was. What the hell was Blackwell doing with documents like that? And how had he gotten them? The names that had jumped out at him from the files were more than just familiar. They were names he had trusted, names he had worked for, and his own name scribbled across a page like an accusation scrawled in blood. His stomach twisted as he recalled the sharp certainty in Blackwell's voice. Evidence of corruption. Months of research, compiled meticulously and protected with the kind of precision that only a seasoned legal mind could manage. He had known something was off the moment he saw the man's eyes, calm, calculating. And now he understood why. Blackwell wasn't just some arrogant rich guy throwing his weight around. He was a predator, and Sloan had just become his prey. He slammed his fist against the steering wheel, a feral grunt tearing from his throat. This was all wrong. It wasn't supposed to go like this. He was the one in control. He was the one with the power. But all it had taken was a briefcase full of damning truths to unravel everything he thought he knew. Sloan glanced out the rain-spattered windshield. Blackwell was still standing beside his car, arms crossed over his chest, his posture relaxed, but his eyes alert. He looked almost regal, like some untouchable monarch surveying the battlefield with serene confidence. "Smug bastard," Sloan muttered under his breath. The anger helped. It pushed back the fear. It gave him something to cling to. His radio crackled to life, a disembodied voice cutting through the storm. "Unit 7, report. What's your status?" Sloan hesitated, his hand hovering over the radio. If he answered, it would be the beginning of the end. Questions would be asked, reports filed, his every action scrutinized with the same ruthless precision that Blackwell had used to compile his evidence. He couldn't allow that to happen. With a quick, jerky motion, he killed the radio. Silence filled the cabin, thick and oppressive. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, drowning out the rain. He needed time to think, Time to figure out how to bury this before it buried him. And there was only one way to do that. Sloan reached over and pulled the briefcase onto his lap. His fingers clawed at the clasps, wrenching them open until the documents spilled across his legs. He snatched up the nearest sheet and scanned it, his eyes moving feverishly over the words. Financial records, transfers of funds to accounts registered under false names, payments to high-ranking officers, kickbacks funneled through shell companies. It was all there, laid out in agonizing detail. And then there were the testimonies. Witness statements describing brutality, extortion, coercion, dates, times, places, all carefully cataloged and annotated. The meticulousness of it all made him feel sick. His own name appeared again, accompanied by an accusation of falsifying reports to cover for another officer's misconduct. He remembered the incident clearly. The man had been his friend. Sloan had thought he was doing the right thing, protecting his own. But now, under the harsh scrutiny of the evidence, it looked like betrayal. Sloan's breathing grew ragged. He could destroy it all right now, rip the pages to shreds, scatter them into the rain until they were nothing more than pulp and ink. But even as he considered it, he knew it wouldn't work. Blackwell had been too calm, too prepared. Whatever this was, it was bigger than just a few sheets of paper. There were copies, digital files, backups stored somewhere far beyond his reach. And if he made a move to destroy anything, Blackwell would have him. Publicly. Mercilessly. Sloan's fingers clenched around the papers, crumpling the edges. His mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. There was only one way to salvage this. One way to keep his life from crumbling to pieces before his very eyes. He had to eliminate the threat, permanently. His gaze drifted back to Blackwell, still standing patiently in the rain as if daring Sloan to make his move. The officer's hand crept toward his service weapon, the cool metal a familiar comfort against his palm. One shot. Quick. Clean. No witnesses. Except there were witnesses. The dash camera was still recording, and Blackwell knew that. He'd counted on it. Sloan swore viciously, his hand jerking away from the weapon as if it had burned him. His options were dwindling by the second, and every minute he wasted brought him closer to the inevitable reckoning. Desperation twisted his thoughts into a knot of rage and paranoia. He couldn't let this happen. He wouldn't. His fingers dug into the papers one last time before shoving them back into the briefcase. His decision was made. The man outside his window had to be stopped. But brute force wouldn't work. Not now. Not with everything hanging by a thread. He had to be smart, cunning, and more ruthless than he'd ever been before. The rain hammered down as Sloan shifted the patrol car into gear. His eyes burned with the determination of a man driven to the edge of his own sanity. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. If Blackwell wanted a war, Sloan would give him one. The rain continued to pour, its steady rhythm pounding against the roof of Harrison's car like 1,000 accusing fingers. He stood motionless beside the vehicle, the chill of the air settling deep into his bones. But it was not the cold that made his muscles tense or his fingers tremble as they clutched the edge of the car door. It was the look on Sloan's face as he retreated to his patrol car, the look of a man who had been backed into a corner and was searching desperately for a way out. Harrison had seen that expression before, many times, on men whose lives he had unraveled from the judge's bench. Criminals who had spent years convincing themselves of their own invincibility until they found themselves staring down the barrel of undeniable evidence. But this was different. Sloan wasn't just a petty crook. He was a man with a badge, with power, and with an ego that had been bruised beyond repair. And there was nothing more dangerous than a man who felt his authority slipping away. Harrison remained rooted to the spot, his eyes fixed on the patrol car. He couldn't see Sloan clearly through the rain-streaked windshield, but he could feel the man's gaze boring into him, a predator deciding whether to lunge or retreat. Slowly, Harrison's hand drifted to the phone in his coat pocket. He pulled it out, his fingers stiff from the cold and from the tension coiled like steel wires beneath his skin. The recording had been running since the moment Sloan had approached his vehicle, audio and video capturing every word, every threat, every unlawful intrusion. But Harrison knew that recording alone wouldn't be enough. Not when dealing with men like Sloan, who had spent their entire careers twisting the truth to suit their own narratives. No, he needed more than just evidence. He needed leverage. The briefcase had been his armor, a fortress built from paper and ink. But now, as it sat in Sloan's possession, torn open and violated, Harrison realized just how fragile his protection truly was. The truth, as powerful as it could be, was only as strong as the person wielding it. And Sloan had just proven himself more than willing to destroy that truth, if it meant preserving his own skin. Harrison's jaw clenched as he tapped his phone's screen, saving the recording to a cloud server he had established months earlier for exactly this purpose. The files in that briefcase weren't just physical documents. They were digital, meticulously archived and duplicated in multiple locations. Destroying the papers would accomplish nothing for Sloan, but Harrison doubted the man had even considered that possibility yet. Fear and anger waged war within him. The part of Harrison that had spent years dismantling corruption from behind a judge's bench wanted to confront Sloan head-on, to call him out for his abuse of power and force him to reckon with the consequences of his actions. But another part of him, the part that had survived countless battles in courtrooms and backrooms alike, knew that confrontation would only escalate the situation. Sloan was not a man who responded well to reason. He was a man driven by ego and desperation, and those were forces that could not be tamed by logic or civility. Harrison glanced around the empty street, the rain reducing the world to a blur of shadows and muted lights. The quiet suburban neighborhood, once so serene and orderly, now felt hostile and treacherous. A battleground where one wrong move could spell disaster. He needed to leave, to regroup, to plan his next move before Sloan made his. But as Harrison turned to open the door of his car, he heard the sudden roar of the patrol car's engine. The vehicle lurched forward, tires skidding against the wet pavement as it accelerated past him. Sloan didn't even glance his way as he sped down the street, his headlights cutting through the rain like daggers. For a moment, Harrison simply stood there, his heart pounding in his chest. Had Sloan given up, fled in fear of what he had uncovered? No. Harrison dismissed the thought almost as quickly as it had formed. Sloan wasn't running away. He was preparing, plotting. Whatever the officer intended to do next, it would not be a retreat. It would be retaliation. Harrison climbed into his car and slammed the door shut, his wet clothes clinging uncomfortably to his skin. The engine growled to life beneath his hands, and he guided the vehicle away from the curb with deliberate precision. His home was only a few blocks away, but the journey felt longer than ever. Every set of headlights that appeared in his rearview mirror made his pulse quicken. Every intersection felt like a trap waiting to be sprung. When he finally pulled into his driveway, Harrison felt a fleeting moment of relief. The house loomed before him, its familiar outline a welcome sight amidst the chaos of the night. But even as he stepped out of the car and hurried toward the front door, his instincts warned him that safety was an illusion. He locked the door behind him, his fingers trembling as he activated the security system. The quiet hum of the sensors coming online provided a brief, fragile comfort. Harrison crossed the darkened living room, his shoes leaving wet prints on the polished hardwood floor. The briefcase was gone, but his laptop remained. He snatched it from the desk and powered it on, his fingers dancing over the keyboard as he navigated to his secure server. The files were there, untouched. Digital duplicates of everything Sloan had so recklessly rifled through. But Harrison knew the documents alone weren't enough. He needed to act before Sloan could manipulate the situation to his advantage. He opened his email client and began composing messages to several trusted contacts, journalists, lawyers, allies within the Department of Justice, people who understood the weight of what he had uncovered and who would not be swayed by threats or bribes. But even as he typed, Harrison couldn't shake the feeling that he was already too late. Sloan was a man of action, not thought. and his retaliation, whatever form it took, would be swift and brutal. Harrison's fingers hovered over the keyboard, his eyes fixed on the screen. He had spent years preparing for this moment, arming himself with knowledge and evidence. But all of that preparation meant nothing if he couldn't predict his enemy's next move. He hit send, his messages flying out into the digital void with the hope that they would reach the right people before it was too late. The rain continued to fall outside, a relentless downpour that masked the sound of footsteps approaching his door. Harrison's fingers still rested on the keyboard, his eyes locked on the screen as if willing the messages to travel faster through the tangled web of cyberspace. But his mind remained tangled in doubt and worry. Sloan wouldn't simply walk away. Not after what he had seen. Not after the humiliation of being challenged and threatened by a man he clearly considered beneath him. His instincts had been honed through years of legal battles, of navigating treacherous political landscapes and confronting men who thrived on corruption and power. But this felt different, more immediate, more dangerous. The rain had finally slowed to a steady drizzle, its incessant patter replaced by a quiet that felt unnatural. Harrison glanced toward the front door, his security system's faint glow providing a reassuring reminder that he had taken precautions. But was it enough? He rose from his chair, the creak of the wood floor beneath his feet, the only sound within the house. The silence felt oppressive, heavy with the weight of everything that had transpired. Harrison crossed the room and drew the curtains aside, peering into the darkness beyond the glass. Nothing. Just the quiet suburban street, its lamps casting pools of pale light that shimmered on the wet pavement. But Harrison couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. With a frustrated sigh, he let the curtain fall back into place. Paranoia would accomplish nothing. He needed to stay focused, to stay sharp. There was too much at stake to allow fear to cloud his judgment. His phone buzzed, the sudden vibration jolting him from his thoughts. Harrison snatched it from the table, his pulse quickening as he saw the name displayed on the screen. Thomas Wright, one of his oldest friends and most trusted allies. A man who had spent his career in the Department of Justice, fighting corruption from within even when it meant risking everything. Harrison answered the call, his voice tight with urgency. Tom, Jesus, Harrison. Wright cut him off, his voice thick with concern. I just read your email. You've kicked over a damn hornet's nest, haven't you? Something like that, Harrison admitted. But it needed to be done. These people, they're poisoning the system. And if we don't expose them now, they'll only grow stronger. I get it. I do, Wright replied, his voice strained. But you've put a target on your back. Especially if you're right about some of the names on that list. I am right, Harrison said firmly. Every piece of evidence in that briefcase is authentic. And Sloan knows it. The bastard saw the files himself. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Harrison could practically hear the wheels turning in Wright's mind as he processed the implications. Sloan, Wright finally said, his tone darkening. He's bad news. Always has been. I've heard whispers about him for years, but nothing concrete enough to take action. If he's involved in this, if he feels threatened, Harrison, you need to be careful. I know. Harrison's eyes drifted back to the window, his paranoia gnawing at him like a living thing. But I can't just sit here and do nothing. I've already sent copies of the files to a few trusted sources. If something happens to me, stop. Wright's voice was sharp, cutting through Harrison's resolve. Don't even think like that. We'll protect you. I'll make some calls, get some people watching your back. But you have to be smart about this. Stay inside. Keep your doors locked. And for God's sake, don't underestimate what a man like Sloan is capable of. Harrison nodded, even though Wright couldn't see him. I understand. Just keep an eye out. If Sloan tries to bury this, you need to be ready to strike. I will, Wright promised. And Harrison, you're doing the right thing, even if it feels like you're standing alone. I appreciate that, Tom, more than you know. They ended the call, but the sense of unease remained. Harrison set the phone down, his fingers trembling As he replayed the conversation in his mind, Wright would do everything he could to help, but even the most loyal allies could only do so much. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each passing second a reminder that time was slipping away. Harrison forced himself to sit down once more, his laptop glowing in the dimly lit room. He needed to stay productive, to keep moving forward before his own doubts consumed him. But his focus was shattered by a sudden, violent pounding at the front door. Harrison's head snapped up, his heart slamming against his ribs. The sound was brutal, relentless, echoing through the house like gunfire. He rose to his feet, his hands clenched into fists. The security system hadn't triggered. Whoever was at his door had somehow bypassed the sensors. Or worse, they had been disabled. "Open up, Blackwell!" a voice bellowed from outside. It was unmistakable. Sloane's voice, filled with rage and desperation. "You think you can pull this shit and get away with it? Think again!" Harrison's blood ran cold. He backed away from the door, his mind racing. How the hell had Sloane found him so quickly? Had he followed him home? Or had he known all along where to find him? Another vicious pounding shook the door, the frame creaking beneath the force of Sloane's assault. "Come on!" Sloane roared. "Let's finish this." Harrison's fingers tightened around his phone. He needed help. Backup. But calling the police would be pointless. Sloane was the police. And even if he wasn't alone, there was no telling how many of his colleagues were just as dirty. He retreated deeper into the house, his mind scrambling for options. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. Nowhere. Sloane couldn't reach him. His only hope was to outsmart the man, to stay one step ahead, even if it meant confronting him directly. The pounding continued, the door shuddering under the relentless assault. Harrison's pulse thundered in his ears, his breaths coming fast and shallow. But as his panic mounted, something else rose within him, a cold, unyielding determination. He had spent his entire life fighting for justice, fighting for the truth, and he was not about to let some corrupt officer tear it all apart. He grabbed the nearest heavy object, a metal lamp from the corner table, and positioned himself just out of sight of the door. If Sloane broke through, he would be ready. The fight was far from over, and Harrison intended to win. The pounding on the door continued, each strike heavier and more vicious than the last. The frame groaned under the relentless assault, wood splintering with every brutal impact. Harrison stood just out of view, his grip tight around the metal lamp he'd snatched up in desperation. The weight of it felt reassuring, solid, but he knew it wouldn't be enough if Sloane broke through. "Blackwell!" Sloane's voice was hoarse with fury. "You think you can hide behind your walls? You think your little tricks are going to save you?" Harrison's mind raced, every survival instinct on high alert. His phone was clutched. In his other hand, the screen still glowing faintly from his last call to Wright. He could dial for help, but calling 911 would be a joke. Sloane had proven that he didn't operate by the rules. Any backup he called might be more of Sloane's ilk officers willing to close ranks and protect one of their own, no matter what atrocities he committed. No, the only way out of this was to confront it head-on, but not on Sloane's terms. Harrison's eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that could be used to his advantage. His house was modest but well kept, its furnishings chosen for comfort rather than show. He had spent years building a life of quiet dignity here, away from the power struggles and corruption he had once fought against so fervently. Now, all of that was at risk of being torn apart by a man whose arrogance was matched only by his desperation. The door rattled violently, the lock giving a tortured squeal. Harrison flinched, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. He needed to buy himself some time, to think, to plan. His fingers tightened around the lamp as he crept toward the hallway, his shoes leaving faint traces of water on the polished floor. He reached the back of the house, his mind cycling through possibilities with ruthless efficiency. There was a window there, leading out to the garden, an escape route if he was willing to abandon everything he had worked for. But running wasn't an option. Not now. Not when the truth was so close to being exposed. Instead, Harrison moved to the small study where he kept his computer. His laptop was still open, the emails he had sent only moments before displayed on the screen. He quickly tapped a few keys, activating the home's surveillance system. Multiple camera feeds blinked to life, showing various angles of the property. Sloane's patrol car was parked recklessly at the curb, its headlights casting harsh beams across the rain-soaked lawn. The man himself was a hulking shadow at the front door, his fists still hammering against the barrier with frenzied determination. Harrison pressed a button, activating the microphone linked to the front door's intercom system. His voice, though strained, remained steady. "Sloane," Harrison said, his words crackling through the speaker. "This isn't going to end the way you think it will." The pounding ceased. For a moment, there was only the sound of the rain and the labored breathing of a man pushed to the edge of sanity. "Come on, Blackwell," Sloane snarled, his voice distorted by the speakers. "You want to lecture me now? You had your chance to walk away, but you just couldn't help yourself, could you? Had to dig your damn nose into things that don't concern you." "Corruption concerns me," Harrison replied. "It should concern everyone, even you." "Spare me the sermon," Sloane spat. "You think you're some kind of hero? Some righteous crusader? You're nothing but a coward hiding behind his money and connections. A man who thinks he's better than the rest of us." "I never claimed to be better than anyone," Harrison said, "but I do believe in accountability. Something you seem to have forgotten." Sloane let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Accountability? You don't get it, do you? There is no accountability. Not for people like me. We're the ones who do what needs to be done. We're the ones who keep the city from burning to the ground. By abusing your power? By covering for criminals instead of stopping them?" Harrison's voice grew colder. "The files in that briefcase, your name is all over them. You can't pretend you're some kind of savior when you've been complicit in the very corruption you claim to be fighting. Shut up!" The sudden rage in Sloane's voice was palpable. "You don't know anything. You don't understand what it's like to be out there, day after day, dealing with scum who would gut you without a second thought. People like you sit in your fancy houses, making judgments from a distance. But you don't know what it's really like." "I know enough," Harrison replied. "Enough to see that your hatred has poisoned you. Enough to see that you've become the very thing you claim to despise." Silence followed, broken only by the faint hum of the surveillance system and the muffled patter of rain against the windows. Harrison's gaze remained fixed on the screen, watching as Sloane took a step back from the door, his shoulders heaving. "I could end you right now," Sloane said, his voice a low, guttural snarl. "I could drag you out of that house, tear it apart, and no one would lift a damn finger to stop me." "You could try," Harrison replied, his tone measured and calm. "But everything you do, every word you say, it's all being recorded. You've already given me more than enough to ruin you. And if you try to force your way in here, you'll only be digging your grave deeper." Sloane's fists clenched, his knuckles white against the darkness. For a moment, he looked like a man on the verge of breaking, a man whose fury had consumed him to the point of madness. But then, something shifted. The rage gave way to something colder, more calculating. Sloane's expression smoothed, his eyes narrowing as he leaned closer to the intercom. "Fine," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You want to play it that way? Go ahead. But you're not the only one who can make calls. You're not the only one with connections." Harrison felt a chill spread through his chest. There was a threat buried in Sloane's words, a promise of retaliation that went beyond mere brute force. Whatever the officer was planning, it would be calculated, ruthless, and intended to destroy him. But Harrison wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not ever. Sloane's words lingered in the air like a toxic haze, poisoning the silence that followed. Harrison stared at the monitor, his eyes locked on the distorted image of the man standing outside his door, rain dripping from the brim of his hat and soaking into the collar of his uniform. The sudden shift from raw anger to cold calculation sent a chill down Harrison's spine. Harrison could almost hear the gears turning in Sloane's mind. the man's thoughts now moving with a precision born of desperation. Sloan wasn't retreating. He was regrouping, plotting his next move with the determination of a man who had already decided that survival was his only option. Harrison's fingers hovered over the keyboard, his eyes flitting between the various camera feeds displayed on the screen. He needed to be prepared for whatever Sloan did next. Whether the man intended to storm his house or come at him from another angle, Harrison had to be ready. His phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a new message. Harrison glanced down, his brows knitting together as he saw the sender's name, Thomas Wright. The text was brief but urgent. Just got word. Sloan's pulling strings. He's got friends high up, Harrison. People who will cover for him if this goes public. You need to be careful. Harrison felt his stomach twist. Of course, Sloan had connections. Men like him rarely operated alone. They thrived in environments where favors were exchanged like currency, where loyalty was measured by how effectively one could silence those who threatened the status quo. But Harrison had been fighting against those networks of corruption for years. He knew how they operated, how they protected themselves behind layers of bureaucracy and plausible deniability. And he knew how to tear them down. He typed a quick response to Wright, "I won't back down. Keep digging. Find out who his allies are and how far this goes." The reply came almost immediately. "Already on it. But be smart, Harrison. Sloan's not above making this personal. Watch your back." Harrison set the phone aside, his gaze returning to the monitor. Sloan was still there, standing in the rain like a dark omen, but his posture had changed. The raw aggression from earlier had faded, replaced by something more deliberate, purposeful. Harrison leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. What was Sloan planning? The answer came sooner than he expected. Sloan reached for his radio, the harsh crackle of static filtering through the intercom's speakers. Harrison couldn't make out the words, but the officer's demeanor suggested that he was issuing orders rather than requesting assistance. Harrison's heart sank as he realized what was happening. Sloan wasn't trying to break into the house himself. He was calling in reinforcements, officers who would be more than willing to twist the narrative in his favor. Officers who would have no qualms about painting Harrison as the aggressor, no matter how ludicrous the claim. Harrison's hands clenched into fists. He had known from the beginning that this confrontation wouldn't be a simple matter of right and wrong, but even he hadn't anticipated just how deeply the corruption ran. If Sloan had allies within the department, and likely beyond it, would be an uphill battle to expose the truth. But Harrison had faced worse odds before, and he wasn't about to let some power-hungry officer and his cronies destroy everything he had worked for. He pressed another button on the control panel, switching the surveillance system to record mode. Every word, every action, every interaction would be captured and archived. Evidence he could use if and when this situation spiraled out of control. He glanced toward the front door, the metal lamp still resting within reach. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it would have to do if Sloan or his men tried to force their way inside. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. Harrison's nerves were taut, his senses heightened by the adrenaline coursing through his veins. His mind raced through various scenarios, each more dire than the last. Then, headlights sliced through the darkness, their beams sweeping across the rain-drenched lawn. Another patrol car. And then another. The street outside Harrison's house was quickly filling with vehicles, their engines rumbling like beasts awaiting the signal to pounce. Harrison's jaw tightened. So, this was how it would play out. A show of force meant to intimidate and overwhelm him, to paint him as a threat that needed to be neutralized. But Harrison refused to be cowed. If Sloan wanted to escalate this, then Harrison would meet him on his own terms. His phone vibrated again. Another message from Wright. Sloan's called in backup. They're framing you for something. You need to get out of there. Harrison stared at the message, his pulse thudding in his ears. Escape was an option, but running would only validate whatever false accusations Sloan planned to hurl his way. No, he needed to stand his ground, to gather as much evidence as possible before making his next move. The intercom crackled again, and Sloane's voice cut through the silence. "This is your last chance, Blackwell. You open that door, and we'll work this out. Otherwise, I can't be held responsible for what happens next." Harrison's lips twisted into a grim smile. "You're threatening me with violence, and then pretending you're offering me mercy. You're more desperate than I thought. I'm offering you a way out," Sloane growled. "Before this gets ugly." "It's already ugly, Sloane," Harrison shot back. "And we both know whose fault that is." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Harrison's eyes never left the screen, his gaze fixed on the man who had chosen to make himself an enemy. But even as his resolve remained firm, Harrison couldn't shake the feeling that he was teetering on the edge of something far worse than he had anticipated. The weight of what he had uncovered was immense, and the forces arrayed against him were growing by the minute. His phone buzzed again. A final message from Wright. "They're coming for you. You need to leave now." Harrison looked around his house, the place he had built over decades of hard work and dedication, the place that was supposed to be his sanctuary. And now, it had become a trap. He took a deep breath, steeling himself against the fear clawing at his insides. If this was the endgame, then he would face it on his own terms, but he would not go down quietly. Harrison's mind raced, his thoughts tangling and unraveling like threads pulled too tight. The messages from Wright, the threats from Sloane, the flood of patrol cars now surrounding his house like vultures circling a wounded animal, it all felt surreal, like a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. He forced himself to take a breath, his lungs straining against the tightness in his chest. Panic would only make him careless, and carelessness, in this moment, would be fatal. He moved through the house with quick, deliberate steps, gathering the few essentials he couldn't afford to leave behind. His laptop, now safely encrypted and powered down. His phone, which he slipped into his pocket with the knowledge that it might soon become more of a liability than a lifeline. And finally, a small flash drive he had prepared months ago containing all the critical files he had amassed, along with contingency plans for situations exactly like this. He had always known the work he was doing would attract enemies. The files he'd been compiling were a direct threat to men who wielded power with brutal efficiency, but knowing the danger and facing it head-on were two different things. The pounding on his door resumed, more forceful now. And then came the voices shouting, demanding, the garbled commands of officers who had no doubt been fed whatever lie Sloane had concocted to justify their presence. "Harrison Blackwell, this is the police. Open the door immediately, or we will force entry." The words boomed through the house, shaking the walls and rattling the glass. Harrison closed his eyes for a brief moment, steadying himself. He had only minutes before they broke through, maybe less. He glanced toward the back of the house. The garden window remained an option, but escaping on foot would leave him exposed. He needed to be smarter, to use their aggression against them. His fingers tightened around the flash drive, the small piece of plastic and metal feeling both reassuring and impossibly fragile. He couldn't afford to lose it. Not now. Not when everything depended on getting the information into the right hands. Harrison's mind snapped into focus, his thoughts sharpening with a clarity born of desperation. He had one chance to turn this around, one chance to reclaim control of a situation that had spiraled into madness. He moved to the desk and powered up his laptop, his fingers flying over the keys with practiced precision. It took only moments to transfer the files from the flash drive to a secure online server, one of several backups he had established as part of his contingency plans. The digital trail was encrypted, protected by layers of security that would take even the most skilled hackers days to penetrate. But Harrison knew that wasn't enough. He needed to create leverage, to ensure that if anything happened to him, the truth would still find its way to the surface. He drafted an email, attaching the most damning files he possessed, names, dates, financial records, evidence that would be impossible to dismiss once it reached the right people. His fingers trembled slightly as he typed the recipients' addresses. Wright was first, but he added several others as well. Journalists he trusted, legal allies who had proven themselves to be true advocates for justice. Once the message was prepared, Harrison hesitated. Sending it now would escalate the situation beyond repair, but holding on to it would only invite more danger. The balance between caution and action had never felt more precarious. Another round of shouting erupted from the front yard. Harrison glanced at the surveillance feed, his heart sinking as he saw more officers gathering, their faces hard and unyielding. The show of force was meant to intimidate him, to break his resolve before they resorted to violence. But it would not work. Harrison clicked send, his decision made. Whatever happened next, the truth would not be buried. A moment later, his phone rang. The shrill tone cut through the tension like a blade, making him flinch. He checked the screen and saw Wright's name flashing in bold letters. Harrison, Wright's voice came through, sharp and urgent. "I just got your email. Jesus, this is worse than I thought. They're not just coming for you. They're coming for everyone you named in those files." "I know," Harrison replied, his voice steady despite the chaos threatening to consume him. "That's why I sent it. If they think they can silence me, they're in for a rude awakening." "There's something else," Wright continued, his tone low and hurried. "I've been digging into Sloan's connections. It's worse than we thought. He's not just protecting corrupt officers. He's part of a network that stretches far beyond this city. Politicians, business leaders, people with the power to make you disappear." Harrison's throat tightened. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a cold chill through his veins. "Then they'll have to come for me," Harrison said, "because I'm not stopping." "Damn it, Harrison," Wright snapped. "They're playing for keeps. You need to get out of there. Now. And go where?" Harrison replied. "They'll hunt me down wherever I go." "No, Tom. The only way I survive this is by fighting it head-on." A silence stretched between them, heavy and uncertain. Then Wright spoke again, his voice softer but no less urgent. "I can get you safe passage out of the city. Somewhere they can't reach you, but you have to trust me." Harrison considered the offer, his mind churning through possibilities. Running had never been his style, but staying here, waiting for the inevitable siege, would be suicide. "I'll think about it," Harrison said, his voice thick with determination. "But if I run, it'll be on my terms. And only after I've made sure they can't bury the truth." "Just promise me you won't do anything stupid," Wright replied, his tone laced with genuine concern. "I won't," Harrison assured him. "But if they want a fight, then I'll give them one." They ended the call, but Harrison's thoughts continued to churn. The officers outside weren't going to wait much longer. And if Wright was right, if Sloan's connections reached as high as he feared, then time was running out faster than he had realized. Harrison's gaze swept over the room, his mind cataloging every option, every potential escape route. He would need to be smart, ruthless even, but he had spent his life fighting for justice, and he would be damned if he let corruption swallow him now. As he moved toward the back of the house, his mind settled on a plan, one that would force Sloan and his allies to confront the truth, whether they wanted to or not. Whatever happened next, Harrison would not be a victim. He would be the reckoning they had never seen coming. Harrison's resolve had hardened into something unbreakable, the kind of determination that could only be forged through years of fighting battles. Others were too afraid or too compromised to take on. He was no stranger to danger. But this was something different. This was personal. The officers outside his house were no longer just enforcers of the law. They were weapons, wielded by Sloan and his network of corrupt allies. Tools meant to silence him before his evidence could spread too far. But Harrison had already ensured that wasn't possible. The files were out. The truth was loose. And the only thing left to do was confront his enemy head-on. He moved through his home with the same calm deliberation he had once used to preside over courtrooms and boardrooms alike. Every action was measured, every thought purposeful. The lamp he had once considered wielding as a weapon was abandoned in favor of something far more effective: His phone was already buzzing with calls and messages. Allies, friends, and those who had received his files, all reacting to the bombshell he had dropped. But Harrison couldn't afford to answer them now. His attention was focused entirely on the man who had brought this storm to his doorstep. Sloane's voice crackled over the intercom again, distorted by the rain and static, but still dripping with arrogance. "Blackwell," he snarled. "You think sending out those files is going to save you? All you've done is dig your own grave." Harrison's fingers hovered over the intercom controls. "The only one who's going to be buried is you, Sloane. You and everyone else who thought they could cover this up. You don't get it, do you?" Sloane snapped. "This isn't about you. It's about preserving order, keeping the wrong people from tearing this city apart. You're just collateral damage." "Order?" Harrison laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "You think what you're doing is preserving order? You're nothing but a thug hiding behind a badge. And your time is running out." "My time?" Sloane's voice wavered, a hint of desperation threading through the bravado. "I have the entire department backing me. You think a few emails are going to change anything?" "They already have," Harrison replied. "The evidence is out there, and every second you spend trying to intimidate me is another second your superiors will have to answer for." A pause followed, thick and oppressive. Harrison could almost feel Sloane's mind working, calculating his next move. But the man was running out of options. And he knew it. "I'm done talking," Sloane growled. "You had your chance. Now you're going to learn what happens when you cross the wrong people." The line went dead, the silence more chilling than any threat Sloane could have uttered. Harrison's eyes flicked to the monitor, watching as the officers outside began to spread out, their movements coordinated and deliberate. They were preparing to storm the house. Harrison's fingers trembled as he activated the final component of his plan. He had been ready for something like this. Maybe not exactly this, but something close enough. And his preparation was about to pay off. He pulled up the control panel linked to his home's security system. The cameras, the sensors, the microphones. It was all interconnected. And it was all feeding directly to the cloud server he had activated when this nightmare had begun. He triggered the emergency broadcast, a live feed that would transmit directly to several trusted contacts, including Wright and a handful of investigative journalists who had already received his files. The footage would be broadcasted in real time, ensuring that whatever happened next would be seen by eyes that could not be silenced. As the system activated, Harrison's phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Wright. "Harrison, what the hell are you doing?" Wright's voice was frantic. "I just got an alert. Are you broadcasting live?" "I am," Harrison replied, his tone as steady as he could manage. "If they're going to come for me, then the world is going to see it. No more shadows. No more lies. Damn it." "Harrison," Wright swore. "This is going to paint a target on your back bigger than ever. They'll stop at nothing to shut you down." "Then let them try," Harrison said. "I've already sent everything out. Even if they take me down, the truth will survive. And they can't kill what's already out there." A beat of silence followed, filled only by the sound of Wright's breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with resignation and admiration. "You're a stubborn bastard, Harrison. But you might just pull this off." "I'm not pulling anything off," Harrison replied. "I'm just doing what I've always done, fighting for what's right." They ended the call, and Harrison returned his attention to the surveillance feeds. The officers were moving in, their weapons drawn and their expressions hard. Whatever Sloane had told them, it was clear they believed Harrison to be a threat. Or, at the very least, they were willing to act as if he was. Harrison felt a chill wash over him. This was it, the moment everything would come to a head. He activated the microphone, his voice calm but resonant as he addressed the officers outside. "Every move you make is being broadcasted live. Think carefully about what you're doing, because the world is watching." A few of the officers hesitated, their eyes darting toward the cameras mounted on the house. but others remained unfazed, their faces set with grim determination. Harrison's gaze flicked to Sloan, who remained at the forefront of the operation, his expression twisted with rage and desperation. The man had lost control, and he was willing to burn everything down to save himself. The first officer approached the door, his hand reaching for the handle. Harrison's heart pounded, his breath catching in his throat. But before the officer could make contact, his radio crackled to life, a sharp voice cutting through the tension. "Stand down. All units. Stand down immediately." The command was repeated, the authority in the voice unmistakable. The officers exchanged confused glances, their weapons lowering in uncertainty. And then, as if on cue, the flood of headlights illuminated the street. Unmarked cars, black SUVs, vehicles Harrison recognized as belonging to federal agents. Men and women stepped out, their badges glinting in the rain as they moved with purpose. Sloan's face went pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. He turned toward the newcomers, his posture defensive and defiant. But it was too late. The truth had finally caught up to him. This story delivers powerful messages about integrity, resilience, and the pursuit of justice, even when facing overwhelming adversity. Harrison Blackwell's unwavering courage against corruption reflects the timeless struggle between truth and power. His actions demonstrate that even when systems are deeply flawed, an individual's dedication to integrity can make a difference. For older audiences, especially those who have spent their lives standing up for their beliefs and working to create a better world, Harrison's fight is a testament to the enduring power of experience, wisdom, and moral conviction. It also serves as a reminder that transparency and accountability are essential, regardless of age or position. Harrison's meticulous preparation and refusal to be silenced illustrate that knowledge and persistence remain formidable tools even when direct strength fails. The truth, once revealed, has the power to shatter even the most entrenched corruption. This story encourages all of us, especially those with the wisdom of years, to keep using our voices, our experiences, and our platforms to stand up for what is right. It's never too late to make a difference, and no effort to uncover the truth is ever wasted. If you were moved by Harrison's fight for justice, help us spread this powerful message. Like, share, and subscribe to support more stories that celebrate courage, resilience, and the power of truth. Your voice matters, and together we can shine a light on what's right.